Could some off-field whispers explain why Hunter Greene is subtly into trade talks? We're going to break it down on today's Locked On Reds.
You are Locked On Reds, your daily Cincinnati Reds podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into the Locked On Reds podcast. Locked On Reds is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. We are your team, your Reds, every single day. And we're glad that you're alongside us here. My name's Jeff, his name's Steve, and we are lifelong Cincinnati Reds fans that have been podcasting about this team for a combined 14 seasons. And it's nice to have Steve back from Ireland, from the wonderful Clover Isles, as we get ready to talk some Reds baseball with you here today as we look at this offseason, because there's lots of priorities, lots of things that Nick Krall needs to do. So what's number 2 on the list? Because obviously number 1 is the big bopper in the middle of the order. Number 2 is a lot more difficult than you think. We'll talk about that later on. In a few minutes, we're going to look at the Terry Francona factor when it comes to Elly De La Cruz and the questions that we are looking at here. And then we will begin with what's going on around these Hunter Greene trade rumors, because it looks to be outside the box score. That's all on today's episode that is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app today, create an account, and use the promo code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. All right, Steve, we talked about this a lot last week between me and some guests, Tim Daniel and Mo Egger and Lance McAllister. And if anybody missed that, I encourage you to go back and check out those conversations. But I didn't get to check it out with you because there's been a lot said about these rumors, not necessarily from Nick Krall, but like other reporters, national outlets, different things that are looking at this, and lots of opposing team fans that are very much excited about the possibility of acquiring a guy like Hunter Greene. So with all of that being said, it's clear that the reasoning behind his availability isn't necessarily related to the box score. So let's adjust our glasses here. Let's squint really hard and turn the lights down low, turn our head sideways, jump up and down, and try and figure out exactly what's going on, because it feels like these are off the mound reasons.
Yeah. You know, it's funny. Before we hit the record button today, you and I were in the offseason prep document, right? All the topics we threw in a pile just to kind of save them for the offseason and we would come back to later. Nowhere in that document does appear Hunter Greene trade talks. Like, we didn't have that one.
Why?
So,
you know, your ace. Yeah.
So hat tip to Mark Sheldon for getting the ball rolling and bringing that question up. But this is, if you take a step back and folks that have covered this team, folks that follow this team for a couple years now, there's been some off-field whispers. There's been some speculation that involves Hunter Greene and about, you know, I don't want to question work ethic per se, but you look at his injury history and you look at some of the diagnoses and the timeframes involved. And quite frankly, you know, there have been questions that consider things like, does he want the ball? Does he want to pitch? Does he want to fight through this?
Right.
And you look at that groin strain this year, and you and I talked about this, I think, on shows and off shows,
right, about
why is this taking so long? What in a grade 1 groin strain is taking this long? And it doesn't make sense. So you start to look at these things and you start to look at the whispers you hear. And you know, not specific quotes that can be attributed to people, not specific things that have come from the front office or from the clubhouse per se, but from people that were probably in a position to have heard something. You hear something one time, you dismiss it. You hear something 2 times, you dismiss it. You hear something a lot of times from multiple places, and you have to at least ask yourself, is there some validity to this? And there's nothing about Hunter Greene's stat line in 2025. There's nothing about Hunter Greene's on the mound performance during his time as a Red that makes you say trade that guy, that makes you say consider moving that dude.
Like, they didn't come away from the LA wild card game and say, we got to get rid of this guy.
Right. But if you take all of those things into consideration, and you ask yourself, could there be some substance to the off-field stuff that makes the Reds more willing to move Hunter Greene than anybody else in this rotation? And clearly, from Nick Kral's answer to the question, are you going to look to trade Hunter Greene? Maybe there is something. Maybe there is more to the story.
His non-answer to it, really, because you would think with a question about such an important player in your roster and such an important player to your organization and such an important player to the city, the answer would be no. But the fact that he didn't say no was super telling. And I find it intriguing because look, talking about off the mound stuff is so difficult. But for a rumor like this, it's clear that there's something more that we're not seeing. It's clear that there's something that we're not privy to that is fueling this, because his performances have only gotten better. We've talked about the fact that, he's really gotten confidence in that splitter. He's really gotten confidence in his location of his fastball. He's gotten a lot of confidence. He is a super confident pitcher on the mound. He knows he can trust his stuff. And then if you look at the financials of it all, yeah, he's one of the higher paid Reds, but that's like saying, I am one of the more less hungry individuals at a Skyline Chili. I mean, obviously, if I just had some Skyline, sure, but usually I'm pretty hungry as it is. Like, the Reds don't have a high payroll, so it's not as if Hunter Greene's making, tens and fifties of millions of dollars. There's not really a financial aspect to this. So there's something else. And when you look at all of the things that point to different reasons as to why there's even this rumor, you look back at that weird timeline where he was out for a grade 1 groin strain for so long. And we talked about what felt like at least a handful of times. A grade 1 groin strain is not something that you miss a ton of time for. I remember whenever he left that game in Atlanta, we were thinking, okay, once they announced it was a grade 1 groin strain, even the most conservative medical diagnoses on Google, which credit to Google, they didn't tell us that we had cancer by mentioning that we had a grade 1 groin strain. But even that, they were just like, yeah, you might be out for like a week or two. And he was out for so much longer than that. And so there's got to be some questions asked. Whether it is perceived to be fair or unfair, that's where our minds go with this.
Right. And this is not new. We heard questions about timelines last year during some rehab stints. And we heard, nothing that we're going to directly quote people on, nothing that we're going to attribute to anybody, but we've heard things questioning timelines and how things progressed.
And I remember we tried to talk about that weird deep injury and all that other stuff, and that was never reported either.
And for me, you take the things that are just loosely out there. You take Hunter Greene's performance when he was available. Maybe the Reds feel like his value is never going to be higher than it is right now. And you strike while that iron is hot. You have a player that, well, maybe around, the tri-state area, maybe around Cincinnati, there's some of this stuff floating around. But as in baseball at large, it's not there. So you take this guy that is ace potential, ace material when he's on the mound, and you flip him while the flipping's good. And
what would the Rays do, right?
Yeah, what would the Rays do? And, the more I think about this and the more I look at what we know and what we think and what we've learned over the last several years and what this can mean for the Reds, the more I don't hate it. And, I again, nowhere on my offseason sheet was me being on board with a trade of Hunter Greene. But if they can get a good return, and they should get a great return. Yeah, this is not going to be a trade for a draft pick and a prospect. This would be a big deal. This would be, a deal that should set the franchise up to be competing for the National League Central next year if they were to trade Hunter Greene this offseason. I'm on board with that. I'm on board with that deal. The deal you floated for with the Red Sox.
Yeah.
With Boston. If that was the deal, listen, where do I sign? I approve. Never mind Manfred in the commissioner's office. I approve that deal right now.
And that one we discussed on my show with Lance this past week. I know we had a crossover, I think it was 2 weeks ago now, with Locked On Red Sox. That wasn't discussed on that show. It was discussed on the one with Lance, but it was Jarren Duran, Justinson Garcia, the password, and Peyton Tolle. So their top outfield prospect and their top pitching prospect and one of their top outfielders for Hunter Greene. Yeah, like that's the thing. And that's the problem with this. Like, we're not saying go put him out there and get 50 cents on the dollar. We're saying it feels like if you're going to make a deal now, you can make the ultimate deal. And that's why we're saying, like, even if you squint, you have to find something weird that may be fair or unfair as a reasoning to put this rumor out there. At the end of the day, you could make it make sense.
Well, listen, Jeff, I missed a lot while I was gone last week, and you had some really good shows with some really good guests, and you talked with Mo Edgar and talked about the possibility, once again, of moving Elly De La Cruz to another position, and you and Mo had a lot to say about that. Mo asked a really good question during that back and forth, and neither one of you answered the question, and I want to get into that coming up next.
The NBA is back, and there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Even if you missed the start of the game or want to ride that hot hand, FanDuel has live bets on everything from who will score next to fourth quarter comebacks. Plus, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay for a shot at a bigger payout. It keeps every game exciting, especially when your team's making that late push. Plus, they've got the futures odds when it comes to the NBA Finals. Right now, the Oklahoma City Thunder are favored to get yet another championship at 2-1 odds to win the NBA Finals right now. Denver Nuggets right behind them, and the Cleveland Cavaliers both with the same odds at 7-1. And then the New York Knicks at 11-1. I think we all know what happens with the New York Knicks, but hey, I'm not here to judge. Anyway, they've got plenty of futures odds over there as well. And if you're a new user, your first winning $5 wager will get you $300 in bonus bets. So what are you waiting for? Go have fun on FanDuel today. Download that FanDuel app right now.
Make sure you are subscribed. That way you don't miss any of the great Reds content we've got coming for you all off season long. Of course, we're going to be looking in the rearview mirror and recapping the 2025 season. And as things happen this off season, of course, we'll lean into that, all in an effort to get you set for 2026. So make sure you are subscribed. All right, Jeff, you had a really great episode with Mo Edgar while I was away. And I love, by the way, that you leaned into keeping this chair full of bald guys. I know that you always perform better when there's a bald guy in this chair, or Tim Daniel. But I really appreciate that. Mo and Lance both did great jobs filling in. Tim did as well. Appreciate those guys stepping up while I was away. But you had a really good conversation with Mo where you were talking about moving Elly. What was going on with Elly? Was he hurt? Well, they said he was hurt. Well, then why did they play him every day? And Mo asked the question, was Terry Francona afraid of Elly? But neither one of you really answered the question. And the answer for me is an undeniable no. He's not afraid of Elly. But then you have to ask yourself, well, if he's not afraid of Elly, then why did Elly play all 162? If he's not afraid of Elly, why aren't we even entertaining the conversation of moving Elly to another position where it would be better for the team? It would be better for Elly. It would be better for everybody involved. Why aren't we at least having the conversation?
You know,
it makes me question, Jeff, that if behind the scenes they've already had a conversation with Elly and he said absolutely not. If they've already had a talk with Elly De La Cruz and he said, I will be playing shortstop, please and thank you. Because if that's the case and they're trying to avoid a public back and forth, a public fight with their superstar player, then maybe you start to get to at least an answer to the question of things that don't make sense without it. Because it makes absolutely no sense that Elly De La Cruz, with his not 100% legs, played 162 games. It makes absolutely no sense that you're not willing to entertain the idea of Elly De La Cruz in the outfield when it gives you a better infield, it gives you a better outfield, and it gives you a better lineup every single day. There's no good reason for it. Unless you're going to say that Elly's not being a team player. Now, Terry's not going to look into a camera and say Elly's not being a team player. But listen, we are a long way. We are far from where we started last offseason was with Terry Francona going down the Dominican and then looking into a camera and say, I'm going to make Elly De La Cruz the best player in baseball. Elly told me he wants to be the best player in baseball. Well, if he wants to be the best player in baseball and Terry wants to make him the best player in baseball, get him out of a position where he can't field the ball. Get him out of a position where he's tired and he can't hit anymore. Rest him, play him in an appropriate position, and make your ball club better in the process. This is not a hard situation unless the player is refusing to cooperate. And in the old days, that wouldn't matter. They would be like, you're going to play in the outfield and we don't care what you think. But it's a little bit different nowadays. So I question, Jeff, if there's something going on behind the scenes here that hasn't leaked out that we don't know about, which is Elly is the problem here.
I don't know that Elly's the problem because my mind went there with this question that it didn't go in our conversation with my conversation with Mo. Because let me answer your question with a question. Who has more power? A player on a rookie deal or that player's agent? That player's agent who you know that you will be negotiating with in 5 years. Because are you just going to punt that now? You're just going to make sure that he blocks your number now?
So here's the thing though, Jeff. If we were doing the Locked On Deferrals podcast, I would tell you maybe that's a factor, but we're not. This is Locked On Reds, and we're talking about the Cincinnati Reds. And you and I and everybody that's ever followed this team knows there's already no chance you're extending Elly De La Cruz. It's simply not happening. Point B is, who knows what the economics of baseball are going to be like after the 2027 lockout. So you can't, that cannot factor in. That can't be a thing. Your point is valid if we were any other, upper third baseball team in Major League Baseball. The Cincinnati Reds are not. You treat Elly in the best interest of this ball club, and you know that you're not going to sign him, and you know that you, by God, better be trading him when he has 2 to a year and a half of team control left, and unless you're going to be the Angels and just let him walk and get nothing. I don't think that the agent factors into this at all.
I think it factors in a whole lot more than you're letting it, because here's the thing. It's not just Elly. This is Scott Boras going, look, you move my client to the outfield, you can kiss any negotiation with any of my other clients goodbye. You'll never get another client of mine on your team outside of a draft or something that, Scott Boras cannot control the negotiation of. If it's like a trade or something like that, then fine. But you burn a bridge. Scott Boras could, and I'm not saying this happened, this is my speculation of the situation, but Scott Boras could say, look, here's the deal. You do that, you burn my bridge. We're not negotiating anymore for anybody else.
What if I told you that I was willing to help pour the gasoline on the bridge, and that Nick Kroll has looked in a camera and told me directly that we're going to follow the Tampa model. We're going to trade. We're going to flip. We're going to churn. We're going to build. We're going to draft. We're not signing high dollar free agents. Then I don't care about Scott Boras. I don't care who his clients are. I don't care what he is doing, because we're going to trade his clients away before we ever sign an extension with them. We're not going to sign any of them in the offseason because he's going to ask for too much money. We're going to draft. We're going to flip. We're going to churn. We're going to build, and we're going to rinse, and we're going to repeat. And Scott Boras can kick rocks.
I like the idea of what you said. I don't think Nick Kroll's personality.
That's true. That's true. Should I send that in? Should I send an email? Should I send an email to Nick?
Just say, because I don't think he said that. Like, I think Scott Boras has come at him and said, here's the thing. You're going to treat my client this way, or you will never worry about my clients being on your team as much as I can possibly help it. And the reason that he feels the empowerment to say that is he is the most powerful sports agent in all of professional sports, in the one sport where being a powerful sports agent really means something. It doesn't mean all that much in the NFL or the NBA where, you have max contracts, super max contracts. In the NFL, you've got salary caps to work with, and sure, there's guaranteed money to do things with. But even David Mulligata in the NFL is nowhere near as powerful as Scott Boras is. Scott Boras has the ability to control things here.
So are we in agreement then that whatever the problem is, it's on the Elly side of this thing, whether it's Elly saying no or it's Scott Boras saying no, that's
But
where
I don't
the
want to make
hang-up
it seem
is.
as though it's Elly himself. It is Ellie's agent.
Okay.
That is the power play of this factor here. And that's not anything that Ellie's going to change unless Elly fires his agent and brings in a new agent. But quite frankly, Ellie's got the guy who's going to get him the money, at least as far as the current Major League economic system is concerned.
Well, maybe 2027 will fix that as well, Jeff.
That'd be a miracle. Because if that happens, then we are talking about the possibility of retaining Elly De La Cruz. Because as it is, it ain't happening. But I think that you're correct in the weirdness that is like, look, what's best for the team should be what happens in this case. And I don't know that the correct answer currently is leave everything as it is when it comes to Elly De La Cruz. But I believe that there's something on this, and I think that it's Scott Boras that is putting that pressure on this situation. There's lots more to get into that the rest of this offseason. You can bet we're going to get back to that at some point for sure. But I want to switch gears here because when it comes to this offseason, we know what the number one priority is. It's getting that big bopper. It's getting the middle of the order hitter. But when it comes to the number two priority, the obvious answer isn't necessarily one that is likely to happen.
The NFL season is in full swing, and honestly, there's nothing better than being in the stadium, surrounded by fans, cheering on your team. But let's be honest, getting tickets can be a hassle between the queues, the login screens, and prices jumping at checkout. It's very, very frustrating. That's why I use Game Time. That's why Jeff uses Game Time. The app gives you the advantage. The fan. Game Time is fast, easy, and backed by the Game Time guarantee. You always get 100% authentic tickets delivered on time and at the best price. Plus, all the fees are included, so the price you see is the price you pay. Jeff and I use this all the time during baseball season. We get down to the banks, we post up, we have something to eat, we have something to drink close to game time, we grab our tickets, we head in. But it's not just for baseball, folks. It's not just for the NFL. They've got college tickets too. You want to go check out the Buckeyes, OH baby. You want to go see those Bearcats. They're having a pretty good year too. Jeff's probably rolling his eyes somewhere right now. You can get those tickets on Game Time as well. Just download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Now terms do apply, but again, just download that Game Time app, use the code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download Game Time today.
If you can't watch us on YouTube, you can always listen to us on your favorite podcasting app. We are literally on all of them, and we're free and available everywhere you get your podcast. All right, Steve, let's switch gears here because as we look at this offseason, the shopping list at the top of it, middle of the order bat. Ideally, middle of the order bat that plays in the outfield, and if it's not that, then maybe outfielder is pretty high up on that list. But number two on the list, I believe, at some point this year, I was like, all right, you got to get some contract extension. We got to retain some guys. There's a lot of talent on this team, and the whole idea is to draft, develop from within, and build a team. And if you can extend some of those guys, that's good. But there's a couple of factors that play into this that I don't believe that they can do that. And so the number two reason is, or the number two offseason priority is?
It's got to be the bullpen. And just real quickly on your first point about contract extensions, you just did a great job of explaining in the last segment why there won't be any contract extensions. And that's agents like Scott Boras, who have publicly said there's no reason for any of these position players to sign these extensions. It never benefits the player. Those were Scott Boras's words. He was talking more about Elly De La Cruz than anybody else, but you know, those
and you
are
can
the
bet
reasons
he's
why,
not the only agent that believes that.
For sure. And those are the reasons why we're not going to see it. Reason 1A is that reason. 1B is the Cincinnati Reds are waiting to see what the economics of baseball look like in the new CBA. It's no accident that there are so few players under team control following the expiration of the current collective bargaining agreement. That was a strategy. They did that on purpose, and they're positioning themselves to be ready for whatever happens next. And we're not going to find that out until 2028. So I don't see any big extensions coming for this team. But what I do see is a window and an opportunity to win in the playoffs before we reach a lockout in 2027. And one of the things they need to do that is to supplement this bullpen with some really good arms. I think the rotation is there, even if they do trade away Hunter Greene. We've done the numbers. We've talked about it. We're going to get into a whole nother episode about what a post Hunter Greene rotation will look like and what that could be. That's later this week, folks. But what we do know is the rotation can still be very, very, very good without Hunter Greene. The bullpen needs some help. The bullpen needs to address some things. They need to go out and get at least 2 bullpen arms that we would consider Group A bullpen arms. Now, I'm not saying you go out and get a guy with an extensive closing history. You don't go out and get a guy that had 40 saves last season. But you look for a guy that has that potential. You look for a guy that's been maybe stuck in the shadow of one of those dudes, that's been a setup man for somebody. You get a couple of those setup men and let them go out and see if they're going to be closers. Those are the kind of arms the Reds need to add to this bullpen. I think they're going to retain enough of the B arms, the 6th inning guys, 7th inning guys. I think we've got that covered. But they got to go out and get some big, scary Group A type arms to go along with Tony Santillan to really cement this bullpen for 2026. And we're also going to talk about the Graham Ashcraft of it all a little bit later this week as well.
Right, because he's a guy that's firmly in the B+ group, but I wouldn't put him in the A group.
But I'm not ready to put him in A. That's exactly what I was going to say.
Got some work to do to get there, and we'll discuss that. I believe we'll do that here coming up on Wednesday. But yes, the bullpen of it, and there's a lot of club options and things like that need to be figured out for other guys. So I don't want to speculate on potential guys they could go and get. I'll tell you this: they're going to keep Scott Barlow and Brent Suter if they're smart.
Yep,
they're going to pick up the club options on both those guys and take them into next year with them. But getting back to the contract extension part of this, because I was pounding the table back in June and saying that you could argue that one of the most important things that the Reds could do this offseason was to extend a guy like Tyler Stevenson. I think that might be off the table. There's still a chance that the Reds could repair that, but it sounded like in the last time we heard any reporting on this is that they were so far apart that Tyler Stevenson didn't even feel the need to come back with a counteroffer. So if you tell me that, they're starting from square one wherever it is that we start hearing reporting about contract extensions with him. He is the most obvious contract extension candidate on the position side of things because, and this is one of the other reasons that we don't believe a contract extension gets done outside of the economic factors of it all. The other question is, who is worthy of it? If you're not talking about Tyler Stevenson, who are you really trying to retain right now?
No, we know that Elly's not going to be one of them. Scott Boras said so already.
Right.
This is not, you're not going to get Matt McLain to commit to an extension right now because you'd have to pay him based on how he performed this last season, and he's not going to sign that deal. You want to talk about Spencer Steer, maybe, but his numbers aren't quite where you would want them to be either. And I don't see that there's anybody that really has played in a way consistently enough to make me say, lock him up right now. And that would be willing to sign a deal for what the Reds would be willing to give. Like none of those things are matching up. So I really just don't see. I just don't see that there's anybody that's signing that deal. And quite frankly, as much as the Reds are waiting on what the new CBA looks like, what the situation is going to be, a lot of these young players that aren't making the $35 million a year are also waiting to see what that new CBA looks like, what the new rules are going to be. Is there going to be a salary floor that increases some of those deals that some of those less than superstar players can get? There's going to be, this offseason is going to be very, very interesting because I don't think there's going to be a lot of big deals. There's going to be a lot of 1-year deals with options, a lot of 2-year deals that we haven't seen before because everybody, owners, everybody, players are all looking to see what is the new normal going to be post collective bargaining agreement.
This could be the offseason that really shows the disparity between large and small markets. Because I bet there's going to be some large market teams that are just like, F it, whatever. Maybe this contract gets grandfathered in. We'll sign it anyway. And there's going to be a lot of small market teams that are just going to be like, there ain't no way we're talking about long-term deals with whoever it is. So I think you're right. There's going to be a lot to that. But I'm with you. I think it's really hard right now because, The Reds were in a position 2 years ago where it was like, oh boy, who do we sign? Because we could sign them early and get them on the cheap. And now the question is, all right, who do we got that we really want to stoop for and trying to get this contract done? Because, I mean, I feel good about a bounce back from Matt McLain. I feel bullish about Noelvi Marte in right field, albeit his bat needs to bounce back a little bit because he ended the season on a low note there. I would love to see Elly De La Cruz happen, but I don't think so. TJ Friedel still has a couple of years of team control left, and he's on the other side of, the prime. There's a lot of different factors that play into these contract negotiations and extension ideas that back in June, I was like, let's get it done. Start locking guys up. And now I feel differently.
It just hit me, and we're real pressed on time, but I'll say this. There's one guy on the position player side of things that might fit in a lane, and that's Noelvi Marte. It's a guy that still hasn't reached his potential, that still might be willing to talk about buying out some arbitration years. And it's a gamble on the Reds' part. It's security for the players' part. I can see that. But beyond him, there's nobody else.
I say this, like going from where he was at the beginning of the season in AAA, having to prove everything, to then getting a contract extension in, whatever, October, November, December of the same year would be one heck of a journey. And that is where we'll end today's podcast. Thank you so much for checking out today's Locked On Reds podcast. Make sure that you're subscribed right here on YouTube and on your favorite podcast app, because we're going to be with you all throughout the offseason talking Reds baseball. This is going to be your destination to talk Cincinnati Reds baseball, whether it's the middle of the season, the heat of the summer, or it's December and January and February and there's snow on the ground. We're still going to be talking Reds baseball right here on Locked On Reds. So make sure that you're subscribed, become an everydayer. And now go check out Locked On MLB between Sully and Locked On MLB Game Night. They got you covered with views around the league and every single game, every single night, all through the World Series. That's Locked On MLB on YouTube and on your favorite podcast app. Steve, it's great to have you back, man, because we are talking Cincinnati Reds baseball here every single day.
Listen, there aren't very much that I know for sure, but one thing I know for sure is there will not be any snow on the ground here ever.
Like not even like on the mountain? You don't even on the mountain?
Not where I live, brother.